On my 18th birthday, my dad threw a $50 bill at me and said, "Get out, I'm done paying for another man's mistake, stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about." I remember standing there, stunned, holding the crumpled bill in my hand, feeling years of anger, hurt, and confusion crash over me at once. My name is Lena Carrington. I had always been a quiet, smart girl who tried to do everything right, but apparently nothing was ever enough for my father, Tom. He was strict, cold, and bitter, always finding a way to make me feel like I didn't belong, like I was a burden. He blamed me for mistakes I didn't even make, carrying the weight of his own regrets and dumping them on me. Growing up, I tried to win his approval, but it was impossible. Every good grade, every accomplishment, every attempt to connect was met with criticism or silence. That day, the final straw broke. I packed my few things, tears blurring my vision, and left the house I had called home for 18 years. I didn't know where I would go or what the future held, but one thing was clear: I would no longer let him control my life or my happiness. That $50 bill wasn't just money, it was a symbol of his rejection, but it also lit a fire inside me. For the first time, I felt truly free to define my own path, to take control, and to plan a future that wasn't overshadowed by his bitterness. It was terrifying, but for the first time, it also felt like hope. I grabbed my small suitcase and stepped out of the house I had known all my life. The air felt strange, heavy with both fear and relief. As I walked down the street, memories flooded back, my dad yelling at Mom, blaming her for everything, while sneaking in glances that made me feel like I was the real problem. I had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering if I had caused the fights, if I could have done something to fix us. Now, leaving, it all felt like a mixture of sorrow and determination. I didn't know where I would sleep that night, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was unloved. My phone buzzed, and it was Ray Donovan. She had been my anchor through everything, always there to listen, to defend me when I felt powerless, to remind me I was worth more than my father's harsh words. When I told her I was leaving, her voice trembled with concern, but she immediately offered a place to stay. The thought of Ray's small apartment, a safe corner away from my father's anger, brought a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to carry his resentment anymore. Even as fear gnawed at me, the support from Ray made the world seem a little less intimidating. I could start over, even if it was just one step at a time. Leaving wasn't just running away, it was claiming the chance to breathe, to think, and to be myself without constantly feeling guilty for things I never did. That night, as I crossed the threshold into Ray's apartment, a strange sense of possibility settled over me. Finding a place to stay on my own proved harder than I expected. Every room I looked at was either too expensive or already taken. I spent days walking the streets, clutching my few belongings, feeling exhausted but refusing to give up. I knew I had to make this work, I couldn't let my father's words define me. Finally, I managed to rent a tiny studio, barely enough space for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. Jobs were another challenge. I applied everywhere, from diners to bookstores, often getting rejected before even being interviewed. Each no stung, but I learned to adapt, to highlight my strengths, and to persist. Slowly, I started piecing together a small routine: work, study, and plan. My neighbor, Eli Brooks, noticed my struggle. He was quiet, with a calm presence that made him seem trustworthy, and he offered advice on handling bills, managing my schedule, and even cooking simple meals. I was wary at first, but his guidance made life a little easier. With each small success, paying rent on time, cooking a decent meal, finishing a shift without breaking down, I began to feel capable. The words my father had thrown at me echoed in my mind, but they no longer controlled me. I realized I could survive, and even thrive, outside his shadow. Every challenge became a test of my determination, every little victory proof that I was stronger than I had believed. By the end of those first few months, I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to build a life I could call my own. A week after settling into my new routine, I received a call from a neighbor near my old home. They mentioned seeing some of my things in a yard sale, and my stomach sank. I couldn't believe it, my old books, my childhood drawings, even the jewelry my mother had left me, all gone, sold without my permission. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just abandonment anymore, it was him actively taking pieces of my life and pretending it meant nothing. My phone rang soon after, and it was him, Tom. His voice was too smooth, almost rehearsed, offering apologies I didn't feel. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said, "I thought it was best for you to move on." But I could hear the pride hiding behind the words. It wasn't about making things right, it was about control. Anger and grief churned inside me. Every object sold was a memory stolen, a reminder that he didn't see me as his daughter but as someone to erase. I realized then that leaving hadn't freed me completely, he was still capable of hurting me, even from afar. That betrayal lit a fire I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just hurt, I was determined. If he thought he could undermine me from miles away, he had no idea how strong I could be when I refused to let his actions define me. From that day, I promised myself that I would reclaim my life, my identity, and every part of me he tried to diminish. The betrayal was bitter, but it became the first real push toward proving I wasn't powerless. I threw myself into my classes and work, determined to make something of myself on my own terms. The diner where I worked became more than just a job, it was a place where I learned discipline, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of earning my own way. Balancing school and shifts wasn't easy, but each day I grew more confident in my ability to manage on my own. One afternoon, while waiting for my shift to start, I met Clara Voss, a retired lawyer who frequented the diner. She noticed the intensity with which I approached my life and offered gentle advice that slowly became invaluable. Clara shared lessons about planning for the future, standing up for myself, and thinking strategically about challenges. Her encouragement felt different from anyone else's, it was practical, patient, and rooted in belief rather than pity. With her guidance, I started seeing my struggles as opportunities to learn rather than obstacles meant to break me. I began organizing my time more effectively, saving money, and even researching ways to protect myself legally from my father's unpredictable behavior. The combination of hard work, persistence, and Clara's mentorship made me realize something important: I was capable. I didn't need anyone to rescue me, I had the strength to shape my life. Every paycheck I earned, every assignment I completed, and every piece of advice I applied built a quiet sense of pride. Slowly, the girl who had felt lost, abandoned, and powerless began to discover a self she could trust, a version of herself that was strong, independent, and unafraid of the future. For the first time, I felt truly anchored in my own strength. One evening, while picking up supplies for the diner, I passed a cafe near my old neighborhood. From the street, I caught sight of my father talking loudly to a man I didn't recognize. His words cut through the air like a knife. He was bragging about how he had ruined me, how leaving me to struggle had been his way of winning. I froze, my stomach tightening, a mix of fury and disbelief flooding me. He wasn't just indifferent anymore, he was proud of causing me pain. That moment ignited something inside me I hadn't felt before. I realized that my anger didn't have to be destructive, it could be focused, purposeful, and strategic. I didn't want revenge through shouting or confrontation, I wanted to outsmart him, to reclaim my dignity in a way he couldn't touch. Every detail of his bragging replayed in my mind, sharpening my resolve. I began thinking about ways to protect myself, to expose his arrogance without stooping to cruelty, and to secure my future so he couldn't claim any power over it. That afternoon, walking back to my apartment, I felt a strange clarity. My focus shifted from surviving each day to planning, observing, and preparing. The injustice he celebrated became fuel for my determination. I could feel the tension in my chest ease slightly, replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't a helpless girl anymore. Every step I took, every decision I made, could become part of a plan that would eventually prove him wrong. The seed of subtle, calculated triumph had been planted, and I was ready to nurture it. I began keeping careful notes on everything I knew about my father's dealings. Each rumor, slip of information, and suspicious action I observed was written down in a small notebook I carried everywhere. I paid attention to patterns, how he conducted business, the promises he broke, and the corners he cut to benefit himself. I realized that knowledge could be more powerful than anger if used wisely. To strengthen my understanding, I enrolled in evening law classes, keeping it hidden from anyone who might tell him. Sitting in those crowded classrooms, I absorbed as much as I could, learning about contracts, property rights, and ways people could protect themselves legally. The process wasn't easy, exhaustion was constant, and temptation to rush or act impulsively lingered. But I reminded myself that patience and strategy were my allies. I didn't want reckless revenge. I wanted to build a plan that was smart, fair, and unassailable. Every lecture, every book I read, and every note I jotted down became a piece of the larger puzzle. Slowly, I began connecting the dots, realizing that my father's arrogance and carelessness left him vulnerable in ways he would never expect. The more I learned, the more confident I became that I could protect myself and claim the justice I deserved without lowering myself to his level. It felt empowering to know that my actions could be guided by intellect and preparation, not just emotion. For the first time, I understood that revenge didn't have to be about confrontation, it could be about reclaiming control, using patience and knowledge to turn the tables in a way that left me standing strong, unshaken, and morally intact. Over time, my friendships became the foundation I had been missing for years. Ray stayed by my side through long nights of studying and work, offering encouragement and reminding me of my worth when doubts crept in. With Eli, our conversations stretched from casual neighborly talks to deeper discussions about life, choices, and the kind of future I wanted. Their support made me realize that connection and trust could exist without fear or judgment. Slowly, I stopped measuring myself by my father's standards. I no longer flinched at the thought of his criticism or let his past words echo in my mind. Each day I spent with Ray and Eli, I grew bolder, more assertive, and more certain of my own value. I began making decisions confidently, without seeking approval or fearing disapproval, learning that my perspective mattered just as much as anyone else's. The small victories in social interactions, standing my ground, expressing my needs, and speaking honestly, felt monumental after a lifetime of feeling unseen. It was liberating to see that the world wasn't dictated by his anger or pride, and I started to envision a life shaped by my choices rather than his resentment. This growth extended into every part of my life, from work to studies, allowing me to approach challenges calmly and with determination. I could finally feel pride in myself for who I was, independent of my father's influence, and the warmth of these relationships reminded me that loyalty, kindness, and trust could be real, unshakable anchors in a life I was now building for myself. I hesitated before making the call, knowing it could change things, but I reminded myself that it wasn't about cruelty, it was about accountability. Using the information I had carefully gathered, I contacted the authorities anonymously, reporting a minor but significant infraction my father had committed at his company. Within hours, the effects were visible. Emails flooded his inbox, meetings were abruptly cancelled, and colleagues whispered with suspicion. I watched from a distance as the confident, untouchable man I had known became visibly tense, pacing his office and glancing nervously at his phone. There was no yelling, no confrontation, just the quiet unraveling of his carefully maintained image. Inside me, emotions collided. Part of me felt a thrill at the justice unfolding, while another part questioned whether I had crossed a line. It wasn't violence, but it was disruption, and I knew it would unsettle him deeply. At the same time, a strange sense of power settled over me. I had acted decisively, using knowledge and planning rather than brute force, and for the first time, I saw tangible proof that I could influence the world on my own terms. The situation was complicated, I didn't feel completely justified, but I also didn't feel wrong. It was a lesson in control, patience, and subtle strategy. That evening, as I lay awake replaying the day, I realized that revenge didn't have to be grandiose or public to be effective. Small, precise actions could create consequences that spoke louder than words, and I was beginning to understand how to wield them carefully. I spent weeks organizing everything I had collected, making sure every detail was accurate and undeniable. Files, receipts, and notes were carefully labeled and stored, each piece a step closer to facing him without fear. I reviewed contracts, cross-checked dates, and ensured that my knowledge couldn't be dismissed. At the same time, I focused on strengthening my own position, finishing courses, saving money, and building a network of support that would keep me independent no matter what happened. The anticipation of confronting him didn't feel like anger anymore, it was a calm, focused determination. I realized that reacting impulsively would only weaken my position, so I trained myself to detach from old wounds and see the situation objectively. Every choice I made was guided by clarity and foresight rather than revenge-driven emotion. I practiced what I would say, how I would present evidence, and how to remain composed even if he tried to manipulate or intimidate me. The process transformed me. I was no longer the uncertain girl he thought he could control. Preparing for this confrontation became an exercise in self-respect, strategy, and discipline. I knew that justice didn't have to be loud or vindictive, it could be precise, measured, and effective. Each day, as I added to my files and tightened my plans, I felt more empowered. The weight of his past actions no longer dictated my emotions. Instead, I carried a quiet confidence, knowing that when the time came, I could stand firmly, speak clearly, and ensure that truth and fairness guided every step of the encounter. The night of the event, I walked into the crowded hall with steady steps, my mind clear and my nerves controlled. My father didn't recognize the calm determination in my posture as I approached him among the gathered colleagues and clients. When the moment came, I spoke directly, outlining the discrepancies, the hidden deals, and the actions he had tried to hide. I presented facts, documents, and timelines with precision, leaving no room for denial. His confident smirk faltered as murmurs spread through the crowd, eyes shifting from him to me. He opened his mouth, trying to twist words or defend himself, but each attempt only highlighted the truth I had laid bare. The whispers grew louder, the tension thickening in the room as he realized he could no longer control the narrative. I remained composed, steady in voice and demeanor, refusing to let anger seep in, knowing that dignity was my strongest ally. Observing the shock and discomfort on his face, I felt a wave of relief and vindication, a quiet triumph for every time I had been belittled and dismissed. The audience sensed it too, justice unfolding silently, methodically, without cruelty, yet unmistakable in impact. As he slumped in defeat, I felt a profound release, the culmination of years of struggle, planning, and restraint. In that moment, I wasn't just confronting him, I was reclaiming the respect and control he had tried to steal from me. Walking away afterward, the weight of the past lifted slightly, leaving space for clarity, strength, and a sense that I had finally turned the tables, not with vengeance, but with truth. After the confrontation, I stepped out into the cool night, the hum of the city around me contrasting sharply with the storm that had just passed. Relief washed over me in slow, steady waves. I had faced him, laid the truth bare, and finally removed the power he had always held over me. Yet beneath that relief was a subtle ache, a quiet sadness for the years lost, the love I had longed for but would never receive. My phone buzzed, and his name appeared. The message was short, an attempt at apology, polite but empty, words without understanding, without remorse. I read it and felt no anger, only recognition that he would never change, never truly see me as his equal, never acknowledge the harm he had caused. That clarity brought a strange peace. I didn't need his approval or forgiveness to move forward, I had carved my own path, proven my strength, and reclaimed my dignity. Walking home, I felt the weight of his shadow lifting, leaving space for my own voice, my own choices, and my own future. The pain of betrayal remained, but it no longer had control over me. I had closure not because he changed, but because I had grown, learned, and acted with integrity. In that moment, I understood that self-respect was more powerful than anger, and peace could come not from him, but from within myself. Each step forward felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I truly felt free to live for me. Months later, I finally settled into a rhythm that felt like my own. My work began to flourish, I earned promotions, managed projects confidently, and built a reputation based on my dedication and skill. Every paycheck reinforced the independence I had fought so hard to achieve, and the sense of self-reliance was exhilarating. With Ray and Eli's support, I found an apartment that felt like a real home, a place where laughter, shared meals, and late-night talks replaced the emptiness I had known. Decorating the space, I chose items that reminded me of who I was becoming rather than what I had lost. A few keepsakes from my childhood, an old notebook, a photograph, a small trinket, sat on a shelf, not as anchors to pain, but as gentle reminders of the journey I had survived. Each time I glanced at them, I felt a mixture of gratitude and resilience, knowing the past shaped me but didn't control me. The neighborhood felt welcoming, the mornings quiet yet promising, and I started to feel the stability I had longed for. Evenings with Ray and Eli, filled with conversations about dreams, goals, and plans, made the apartment feel alive. I realized that life could be full without my father's presence or approval. I had cultivated trust, independence, and joy, and for the first time, I could imagine a future built entirely on my terms. The small victories, the routines, and the sense of belonging created a life that felt both earned and cherished. In my own space, surrounded by supportive friends and reminders of my strength, I finally felt at peace with the past while fully embracing the life I had claimed for myself. Looking back, I can see how every wound, every betrayal, and every moment of doubt shaped me into someone I barely recognized at first, but in the best way possible. The pain I carried became a teacher, guiding me to patience, focus, and clarity. I learned that revenge wasn't about causing suffering or feeding anger. It was about reclaiming control, setting boundaries, and proving to myself that I could rise above the harm done to me. Each step I took, from walking away to building a life I could call my own, was part of a process of growth. I discovered resilience I didn't know I had, strength in moments of quiet perseverance, and courage in choosing integrity over retaliation. My father's shadow no longer loomed over me. Instead, I carried the lessons he inadvertently gave me, shaping a future I could trust and take pride in. The journey wasn't easy, and the scars remain, but they are reminders of how far I've come, not of what was stolen. I hope anyone who has felt powerless knows that reclaiming life and dignity is possible, even after betrayal. Real victory lies not in humbling someone else, but in standing tall, embracing your worth, and moving forward with intention and self-respect. As I reflect on everything, a bittersweet satisfaction settles in, a mix of sorrow for what was lost and pride in what was earned. Life continues, brighter and freer, and I finally understand that true empowerment comes from choosing yourself above all else, no matter the past.